I can't believe Christmas is here. The excitement that comes with Christmas, right? A lot of excitement around our house. We try to make Christmas fun, so I'm always coming up with games or mysteries or whatever for the kids to participate in and try to win money or gifts or things like that. We try to make the Christmas time a fun time amidst all the craziness and the madness. There's a few Christmases that I remember, a few Christmas gifts that I remember growing up. I remember when I was pre-teen that I got an Atari 2600 for Christmas. Anybody remember that? Black joystick with just the one red button. I got the Pac-Man to go with it. I have a great Atari 2600 Pac-Man imitation. And then when you eat a ghost, boop, boop. Right on, right? I maybe had the 2600, like one of you. Thank you. It also came with Pitfall. Remember the game Pitfall? So that was awesome. And Space Invaders, so the Atari 2600. A lot of these type of gaming systems are making a comeback. One of the gifts that my son Zach wanted for Christmas was the old Super Nintendo Entertainment System. So he's wanting that for Christmas. So a lot of comeback games, retro games. I also remember a gift that I got as a boy that made a comeback a few years later, the Stretch Armstrong. Anybody have a Stretch Armstrong? So it's this guy, he was kind of awkward and somewhat bulky, and you stretched him out as far as you possibly could, and he would supposedly come back into some type of similar shape. So Stretch Armstrong, I got that when I was a kid. And then when I became a young adult, my brother's sons, who were kids at the time, they got a Stretch Armstrong. And so it was like the comeback toy of the Christmas. And so when my nephew Joshua got a Stretch Armstrong, I had a brilliant idea. Between my brother and I, again, we're adults, okay? We're not 6 years old, but we're adults. And I said to my brother, I wonder how far Stretch Armstrong can really stretch. The answer is about 5.5 feet before they actually break. We found that out within about 30 seconds after my nephew opened his Christmas present. After about 5.5 feet, they began to split, and there's this kind of weird jelly substance that comes out of them and pretty much ruins the toy. So whatever Christmas money I got that year was spent for reimbursing over Stretch Armstrong, and my dad was really happy about it. I got my grandson a Stretch Armstrong, and within 30 seconds, you boys in your 20s ruined it. I can still hear that voice in my head. A lot of excitement around the Christmas season, a lot of gift giving and excitement and things that happen. What we've been talking about in this series is that there is a gap between what the commercials promise during the Christmas season and reality. That the propaganda of Christmas is really fake news. That's a term that gets thrown around a lot today, but there is some fake news out there, and the fake news sometimes has to do with the expectations of what Christmas is going to look like. A lot of commercials tend to overpromise, right? What we've said is that miracles don't always happen, like Frosty does melt, and the Christmas lights have to come down, and the family doesn't always get along at Christmas time, no matter what is portrayed in the commercials and in the stories and in the books. Sometimes families fight during Christmas. Sometimes that uncle or that cousin gets on your nerves. Sometimes you get on their nerves. Everyone's got the crazy uncle, right? Or the Cousin Eddie that shows up for Christmas. And if you don't know who your Cousin Eddie is, it's because you are Cousin Eddie in your family. You don't always get along, right? The miracles don't always happen. The kids don't always fall down in extreme gratitude and say, "Thank you, Dad and Mom, for your investment in me and buying these gifts that you could not afford." That doesn't happen. There's a gap between the propaganda and reality. As a matter of fact, the morning after Christmas sometimes is a big letdown, right? That you come back to the harsh reality of life, the pretending is over, and you have to deal with the bills to pay and the everyday grind of life. But what we have said in flipping the script in this series is that I believe that the marketing doesn't necessarily over-promise and over-deliver when it comes to Christmas. I believe that the marketing actually under-promises, that Christmas is even better than you realize. Because in the Christmas story, God enters into the mess. He enters into the chaos on this eternal rescue mission. That He came, we saw in week 2, to the shepherds, that He came to the least likely day, the least likely people in that culture. He came to them. He came to the least likely people to announce the good news that He was entering the world. Not only did He come to the least likely, He came for the least likely. He came for us, the least likely people, to receive and deserve His grace. That He came to the least likely, He came for the least likely, that when the glory of God in the Christmas story, when that night on the hillside, when the shepherds were there and the glory of God came, that the glory of God is waiting. Now when the glory of God comes, that there's weight to it. There's weight to it because you realize in the moment how holy and how good and how pure God is and how unholy and impure we are. And so there's a weight to the glory of God because it exposes us for who we are. It exposes us in our sin. It exposes us in our chaos, just like it did the shepherds that night. And their reaction was one of fear. It was a fear of being known by God, this holy glory of God that has fallen, and suddenly I'm exposed in all of my sin, that there's a fear with that. But the gospel is, the good news is that fear is replaced with joy, unspeakable joy. That there's not a reason to be afraid of being exposed by God. That being exposed by God leads to our redemption and forgiveness. That we are exposed so that we might know that we are chosen and loved and forgiven by this God. And so our fear is replaced with joy and peace. And that was the gospel on Christmas night. And then last week we looked more specifically at this group of magi who pursued this young Messiah. And what we said last week is that Jesus is the treasure that is worth pursuing. And the reason that Jesus is the treasure that is worth pursuing is because Christmas is just the beginning of the story. That Christmas is even better than we realize because Jesus is that gift that just keeps on giving. Like not in the Christmas vacation kind of way, the Jelly of the Month Club, like the gift that just keeps on giving, Clark, right? The Jelly of the Month Club. By the way, we kind of understand like why the gifts in Christmas vacation went to Jelly of the Month Club. I mean, before that, Clark thought he was getting enough money to get a pool and fly the entire family with airline tickets. So maybe the reason he got the Jelly of the Month Club certificate is because the business was about to go bankrupt from the Christmas bonuses, right? And so anyways, I don't even know how that came out. That's just like watching Christmas Vacation too many times and thinking about it. So here we go. The gift that keeps on giving really is Jesus, the greatest treasure. He is the gift that keeps on giving, that I get Jesus for eternity. I was thinking about this week. Did you know that, I can't even begin to recreate a list of Christmas presents that I have received in whatever 40 plus years that I can remember any type of Christmas. Like if you were to say, all right, create a list of all the Christmas presents you've received since you've been a child old enough to remember things. I couldn't even start. I can't even tell you what I got last year. It was probably some type of clothing, right? Or something to read, but that's a given for me. I'm always going to get clothes and some type of book because I really am at a stage in life where the only thing that you can give me is clothes, and I love to read, so I'm probably going to get a book. I can't even recreate last year's Christmas list. But Jesus is the eternal gift that keeps on giving when we can't even remember the gifts that we have received, because Jesus is enough. He is an eternal gift that is enough for life in the trenches of everyday living. And the impact of the invasion of God on earth, the Christmas story, does not end when we put away the manger scene, when we put the decorations back in the tub. As a matter of fact, it is the starting point that ends with a renewed heaven and a renewed earth. That the Christmas story is really pointing forward to the end of time. Let me just read Revelation 21. Stay in Hebrews 2, but we'll throw Revelation 21 up on the screen. This is what the Christmas story is pushing toward. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. So here's, again, this kind of eternal moment of God coming to earth once and for all. He will dwell with them. They will be His people, and God Himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be any mourning or crying or pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. And He who sat on the throne said, Behold, I'm making all things new. Also He said, Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. And He said to me, It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give from the spring of water of life without payment. The one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. The Christmas story is pointing toward this final entrance of God upon earth, the end of the story, that Christmas is just the beginning. Like, it reminds us that God came, but is pushing us toward the end. And if you read this, you remember, like, this is a recreation of what happened in the garden. Like, it pushes us back to Genesis 1. That in the beginning, God created this heaven and earth, and that we sinned against Him, and that God has, from that moment forward, been pushing toward the end of time. And that's the story of redemption, of which the Christmas story is a part of. As a matter of fact, it all started way back in Genesis chapter 3, after Adam and Eve had sinned, and God is calling down these curses upon Adam and Eve and the serpent, upon Satan. And God says to Satan, He said, this is the prophecy, He says to Satan that started this redemption story, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. And then this is what God is saying over the enemy, over the devil. He shall bruise your head. In other words, the offspring of the woman, so this coming Messiah, will bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. And so God gives this prophecy of a snake stomper, right? Of someone who will stomp the head of the serpent. And so that's the story of redemption that starts in Genesis 3 and pushes throughout the Scriptures all the way to Revelation chapter 21. And so the redemption story began in the opening scene and is woven throughout all of the biblical narrative. It is pushing us forward to that final scene, which is why Christmas is even better than we realize. So we're going to drill down on this passage this morning that provides some key insight into the Christmas story. And it really kind of answers the question, like, why Christmas? Why Christmas? And I want to tell you just big picture context of the book of Hebrews. This writer, we're unsure who the writer of Hebrews is. There's a lot of theory on who it is, if it's Paul or Luke or some other person that we're not given their name. But this writer of the book of Hebrews has a big purpose when he writes this book. And his big purpose is to let us know that Jesus is greater than. He's greater than whatever you want to put behind that. He's greater than the law, the prophets, the great men of the Old Testament. He's greater than the angels. He's greater than everything. And so that's the theme of the book of Hebrews, is that Jesus is greater than. So let's drill down in chapter 2, just verses 14 and 15, and we will see how the Christmas story comes to life here. Hebrews 2:14, since therefore, and I'm going to read the whole passage and we'll come back and walk through it. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, He Himself likewise partook of the same things. This is Jesus He's talking about, that Jesus partook of the same things, that through death Jesus might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. I know you're like, Devin, that's a weird Christmas passage, so let's unpack this and do a slow drive through Hebrews 2:14 and 15. You don't want to drive fast. It reminds me, like, we went to the Galaxy of Lights last night in Huntsville, and like, there's no going through the Galaxy of Lights at a fast pace. We thought we would kind of beat the crowd and get there near opening time, which basically means we're just going to sit 2 hours before we get to the entrance, and then you're going to do a slow drive. So if you're anticipating going through the Galaxy of Lights, just know, like, there's no passing lane. And there's like multiple times while we're doing the slow drive, I turned on my signal like I was going to pass. But there's no passing when you go through the galaxy of lights. So if you want to go through the galaxy of lights and see the greatest Christmas lights from the 1980s, then go. But we're going to slow drive. I'm just kidding. It's really a fun family experience. It's one of those moments like I was talking about earlier where like everybody's supposed to get along, and like halfway through, I'm like, Levi, because he's out of his car seat because he's got freedom during the galaxy of lights. And he's out of his car seat so he's just so he can see the lights. And like halfway through, I'm like, Levi, stop playing on the radio and look at the lights. Like that's why we're here. Do you want me to spank you? There was no spanking involved. So we're going to do a slow drive in Hebrews chapter 2 so that you can see the lights. If you drive fast, you're going to miss stuff. Since, therefore, the children share in flesh and blood. This word share is the original word where we get the same word for fellowship, for communion. It's the word koinonia, to fellowship, to have stuff in common with other people. And the Hebrew writer says, as children, we share in flesh and blood. What I have in common with you, one of the things I have in common with you is that we're flesh and blood people. We are all people of flesh and blood. We share that. There's no humans that do not have that. There's not bloodless humans. There's not fleshless humans. We share in flesh and blood. Now I'll tell you, that's like a sermon in and of itself we don't have time to get into. That we share flesh and blood. No matter what the color of that flesh is, and no matter where that flesh lives or where that blood flows through that person's veins, we share common flesh and blood. And at a very bottom level, you're exactly like the people sitting beside you, regardless of how much money's in their bank account and what their skin color is and where they shop and what they're receiving from other people. You share flesh and blood with them. Did I say it's another sermon? That means I'm not supposed to be talking about it now. We share flesh and blood, but Jesus is different. He himself likewise partook of the same things. The word partake in this passage means to take hold of something that is not naturally yours. To take hold of something that's not naturally yours. I can illustrate it this way. A lot of you have a natural hair color, but you've partaken of a different hair color, right? So I would naturally be mainly gray, but I'm married to someone who's younger than me, so I have to partake of a darker hair color. You know way too much about me. What's wrong with you? Stop pointing fingers like most of you are there. Either shave it or change the color of it, right? It's not naturally. We partake of something. It's the extrovert who has to keep their mouth closed. It's not natural to them. It's the introvert who has to learn to speak up. It's not natural to them. He himself likewise partook of the same things. Jesus willingly took hold of something. What is it? It's flesh and blood. Jesus willingly took hold of flesh and blood. We call it the incarnation. That word incarnation is a Latin word that means to take flesh, to take on human flesh, to become incarnated with something, to take on something that's not yours. And in this case, Jesus added something to his nature. He took on human flesh. Now, this is another sermon I'll have time to get into. He took on our nature so that we can take on his. His nature is eternal. It's not temporal and bound by flesh and blood like ours. It's an eternal nature. Jesus took on our nature so that we might take on his nature and be with him through all of eternity. That's worth amen right there. Another sermon. Don't have time to get into that. We've got to stick to Christmas in this text. He added human nature. 100% fully God, 100% fully human at the same time. We scratch our heads at that. Like, how can he be fully God and fully human? Not 50% God and 50% human, but 100% God, 100% human at the same time. He took on human nature. And then the Hebrew writer gets us to the purpose. So if you're writing stuff down, like why Christmas, here we go. Why Christmas? One, he partook human flesh, that through death. That through death. There's our purpose statement. He partook of human nature so that he could die. God doesn't die. He's eternal. Humans die. Jesus became human. He took on human flesh and blood. He partook of our nature, our physical nature, so that he could die. He became flesh so he could die. Why Christmas? So that he could die, become human. The nature of God's eternal. God doesn't die. So God the Son takes on human nature so that he might die. But why did he die? Like we're writing stuff down, like so that he could die. And then like here's number 2, why Christmas? So that he might destroy the one who has the power of death. That is the devil. So why Christmas? Why did the Son of God become flesh? So that he might die. Why would he need to die? So that he might destroy the power of death, the devil, the one who holds the power of death. Now, this word destroy here, we think of it in terms of obliterating something. It really means to nullify something, to take away the power of something, to remove the power of something. So get what the Hebrew writer's saying here. Jesus took on human flesh so that he might die because his death took away the devil's best weapon. It took away the devil's best weapon, death itself. Now, you've heard me say, if you hear me preach very long, the devil's got one agenda for you. It's to destroy you. It's to kill you. It's to maim you. It's to destroy you. It's to kill everything in your life. That's his agenda for you. There's no getting around it. There's no like, well, he's going to take it easy on me. No, like his goal is one thing: destroy you, kill you, ruin you, take everything he can from you. That means physically, that means spiritually, that means emotionally, and most importantly, that means eternally. Spiritual death. So get what's going on here. The birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus disarms Satan. Takes away his primary weapon, which is death. Weaker weapons are useless against more powerful weapons. Remember that scene in Indiana Jones where Indy is there, and there's this guy that comes out, and he's wearing all this like ninja garb. He's got all this stuff, and he pulls this long sword out, and he starts just going to town with that sword, and Indiana Jones is just watching him do all that. And then when the guy's done, Indy like pulls the pistol from his side, like bam, shoots the guy dead. Remember that scene? And Indiana Jones like knives are useless in a gunfight. Like you can't even get near me with the sword, like because I've got a more powerful weapon than you. Like weaker weapons, you don't bring bows and arrows, right, to a gunfight. And so the weaker weapon is destroyed by the more powerful weapon. God, the Son, partook human flesh so that he might die, because in dying, he is disarming the enemy of his most powerful weapon. But the purpose doesn't stop there. Here's the rest of the story. Why Christmas? Here's 3, right? So 1, Jesus could die. Through his death, he might destroy the devil. 3, why Christmas? And deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. Why Christmas? The ultimate purpose here, where he's pushing us in this passage, is to set us free from the fear of death. To set us free from the fear of death. In the redemptive story, Satan's greatest weapon, death, loses its power, and therefore it is no longer to be feared. As humans, we're naturally afraid of death. Now, I'm not just talking about physical death, of dying, of getting dead, like how am I going to get dead, right? I'm not talking about just that, fear of death. we are perhaps even more afraid of stuff dying in our lives, aren't we? We're afraid of, is this relationship going to last? Or is it going to die? We're afraid of, are my children going to be okay? Is something going to happen to my kids? We're afraid of, are my kids going to grow up and know and love Jesus? Or are they going to get swept away with the craziness around them? We're more afraid of, am I going to have enough money in the bank to pay the bills this coming year? We're afraid of stuff that dies. We're afraid of, is my security going to be taken from me? Am I going to lose a job? We're more afraid of not being happy. We're more afraid of, is my health going to be taken away? Is the people I love, is their health going to be taken away? Am I going to lose a loved one? We're more afraid of separation. Am I going to be separated from this person? Some of you are spending Christmas without someone that was in your life last year. We're afraid of not just dying physically, but the toil that death has in the everyday, that it takes stuff away from us, and relationships are ruined. And some of you don't know if you're going to be married this time next year because your relationship is being strained and you're afraid of stuff dying. And we're afraid of the unknown, and fear holds us captive. And in the story of God becoming one of us, in order to die, in order to overthrow the power and the weapon of Satan, in this story, we are set free from the chains of fear. We're set free from the chains of the fear of death, of stuff dying, of the security blanket, of my money, of my relationships, of the things that we fear of losing or being taken away from us. In the redemption story of God, we are set free from that fear, because He did what was necessary to overthrow death, to overthrow the enemy. We'll bring this full circle in just a moment. Let me back up to Luke chapter 2. The shepherds in the field. Remember what the angel said to them. Do not be afraid. Their natural reaction was fear. And the angel says to them, do not be afraid, because I'm bringing good news of great joy. A Savior, this is so key to the Christmas gospel. A Savior has been born who is Christ the Lord. Now, let me show you how Paul explains this in Colossians chapter 2. Same concept. Here's how Paul describes it in his letter to the church at Colossians. He, this is Jesus again, what's the next word? Disarmed. Sound familiar? Took the power away. He disarmed the rulers and authorities. This is spiritual rulers and authorities. So back to the spiritual enemy. He disarmed the rulers and the authorities, and He put them to open shame. How? By triumphing over them in Him. Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in question of food and drink. So in Colossians chapter 2, let me revert back up to verse 14. By canceling, well, let's just back up and put it in context. Verse 13. And you, who were dead in your trespasses and uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with Him, having forgiven us all our trespasses. How? By canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This He set aside, nailing it to the cross. So, get the picture here. Jesus, talking about the crucifixion, forgiving our trespasses. There's that exposure idea, that we are exposed for who we are. We're exposed in our sin, and we're exposed for our trespasses, and He forgives that. Forgiving our trespasses, canceling the record of our debt. There's our source of fear. The record of our debt. What does that mean? That means I know me. You know you. We know us. The reason our fear holds us captive is because when we've come before God, our sin's exposed. And guess what? It's ugly. Like we know us. That's the record of our debt. Because we know what's there. We know what's in the hidden corners. Paul says he's forgiven our trespasses, he's exposed us, and then he's canceled the record of our debt. He's canceled the source of our fear. We know us, and he's canceled that. And then he brings in this concept with legal demands. This is like law requires justice language. And Paul says he set those things aside. He nailed them to the cross. And in the process, the very first verse we read, in the process, he triumphed over the enemy. He disarmed the enemy. So here's how that comes together. Satan is the master accuser, isn't he? He's the master accuser. He's in your ear. He's in your head. He's constantly accusing you. He's constantly telling you how bad you are, how sinful you are. A Christian wouldn't behave that way, wouldn't do those things. He's constantly in your ear, constantly accusing you. He is the master accuser. So what's Paul saying here? What's the Hebrew writer saying about what happens in the gospel? What happens in the gospel, in the story of redemption, is that the accusations of the enemy, the master accuser, the accusations, their power is removed. He has no ability and right to accuse you any longer. You know why? Because Jesus, what? Nailed it to a cross. In other words, he took my accusations. He took my place. He took my sin. He took all those things that the master accuser wants to whisper into my ear, and he nailed them to a cross. He defeated the master accuser. He no longer has the ability to accuse me. He's powerless. He's disarmed. If you're a Jesus follower, being held bondage by sin or fear is to be held captive by a powerless enemy. How many of you are afraid of spiders? A few of you. I'm not, and I don't really get why people are. Now, I've never been exposed to like those spiders in like Australia that like can walk off with one of your kids. So maybe in those contexts, like 20-foot spider might be different. But most of the spiders that I've encountered, they're very small creatures, and there's a very simple way to get rid of them, right? So it's like back to Genesis 3:15, stomp on the head of the serpent. And so I don't like get the fear of spiders, because I'm thinking like I'm a really big grown man, and that's like not a grown man. So like, no more spider. For a spider to have power and control over me would be foolish. Because in the economy of the survival chain, right, he's powerless against me. He's powerless against me. Could he hurt me? If he stung me or bit me? Yes. If I reach down, they don't sting. You look at me like, sting? They don't sting. I heard that, Jordan. You said that out loud. That wasn't an inside thought. If I reach down and pick it up, right, it's going to bite me, not sting. Who would ever say sting? Aren't there some spiders that sting? I don't know. Now I'm trying to talk myself out of it. A spider's got the potential to hurt me or damage me if I am foolish with it. Hello. But in the end, a spider really is powerless against me. It's one foot stomp from being destroyed. And when we allow sin and fear to hold us captive, we are allowing a powerless enemy to control us and hurt us and dominate us when it's already been defeated. You are no longer a slave to fear. You're no longer a slave to sin. You're no longer a slave to death, because the victory is already won. Revelation 21 is guaranteed. It's the end of the story. It's complete. It's finished. We live from victory. We don't live for victory. We don't live to victory. We live from victory. That the devil's already been defeated. It's not up for grabs. It's not in the dice. It's not how's this thing going to shape up or turn out. It's done. We live from victory. He is a powerless enemy against us. Why Christmas? Jesus became one of us. He partook of our flesh and blood, so that he might die on our behalf to do what we are incapable of doing on our own, of defeating death and disarming Satan, whose primary weapon is the fear of death. And that's why Paul says to the Corinthians at the end of his book, when he's just talked about the resurrection, that's why he says, "Death, where is your victory? Death, where is your sting?" It has none, because Jesus has taken the sting of death. If you're a follower of Jesus, you have placed your life in the hands of the one who has conquered death. He is the author of life. Now that's good news. That's gospel good news. But here's the reality of Christmas. People still live under the weight of the brokenness, don't we? So yesterday, I was in the bedroom being an awesome husband and folding clothes. Because that's what my wife told me to do. So to reveal the impurity of my heart instead of the purity, I was in the bedroom watching clothes, or folding clothes, because Ashley had been vacuuming for, 8 hours, and the sound of the vacuum was about to make me run through a window. I was like, how can I get out of this and also appear like a good husband? Maybe I'll take these clothes in the bedroom, close the door, watch SportsCenter, and act like I'm folding clothes. So that's going on. And Levi and I are in the bedroom, and I hear this crash that I thought was maybe, literally the things that came to my mind were like the Christmas tree has fallen over, because we bought this Christmas tree that was basically dead when we bought it. And so literally the tree is up right now because the gifts are holding it up. Like that's how dead the tree is. So I'm thinking like gravity finally is like the tree is over, it's toppled. I hear this loud scream. Actually, Levi had transitioned back in the living room at this point, was in the living room with his mom. So the next sound I hear is Levi screaming, only to be topped by Ashley screaming, "Oh no!" Like what has happened? Like either Christmas tree has fallen, or my next thought was Levi has been hurt somehow. But what really had happened is, the midst of her obsession with vacuuming, that she had plugged in the vacuum cord to the same cord as the lights that are on our mantle, which has Christmas village, candles, reindeer, all kinds of stuff up there. And so as she was vacuuming, the further that she got, the tighter the cord got, and she transitioned into another room without realizing it. The cord was too tight, and she literally pulled everything off the mantle onto the floor in a moment's time. And that was the loud sound of crashing little ceramic houses and candles and garland and lights crashing onto our beautiful wood floor and leaving permanent damage on our floor. And my son responding in sheer terror from his mom's reaction. And so when I walk in the room, there's all these pieces and parts, and I guess God in His sovereignty, none of the little ceramic houses were broken. All the parts were candle parts. So I'm trying to get Levi up because I think it's all glass. And so it's just a lot of chaos amidst the brokenness of that moment. And it's a silly illustration to remind us that the gospel is really good news at Christmas, but there are people that are living under the weight of the brokenness, that your mantle has been erased. It is a fiasco in your life right now. And there's some of you here today that feel alone at Christmas time. There's some of you that feel very insecure about what the future holds in your life, and you don't know what 2019 looks like, or the years ahead of you, or even January. There's some of you that are feeling the brokenness of a burden in your life, and some of you feel estranged in your relationship, and there's a heaviness about you, and some of you feel very unfulfilled, and some of us just really feel just beat up in life right now, or banged up, and we don't know if we can go forward. And some of you are facing sickness that you weren't anticipating a year ago, and some of you feel very fragile right now, and some of you feel very helpless. And what I want you to hear about Christmas is, it is better than you realize, because we have been promised at Christmas, we have been we have been promised that the end of the story is that God will renew all things and complete all things and fulfill all things for His glory. It is better than you realize, because what we have promoted as Christmas and what has been promoted to us as Christmas under-delivers. It's better than you realize, because it's a story of redemption and rescue of a God who became one of us so that He might die in my place and defeat my greatest foe so that I might live in freedom. You know this. Christmas finishes every year. And what we have been anticipating is soon a memory that will fade. But we can look forward to a day that will never end and a future that will never disappoint. You'll put the decorations back in the tub. You'll take down the lights. You'll deflate the giant snowman in front of your house. You'll throw away the torn paper, the boxes. You'll turn off the Christmas music and you'll say goodbye to the relatives. But I'm here to tell you, the rescue story doesn't end. Because the story of redemption, the story behind the story that God has been weaving for generation after generation after generation, the story to which God is pushing us forward, this story of redemption, it provides, listen to me, amidst the chaos and the brokenness, the story of redemption provides unequaled comfort. It is, as we've talked about, it provides indescribable joy. It provides incomprehensible peace. It provides unparalleled hope. It provides incomparable victory and faith in the Messiah who came and died on a cross, who took on human flesh. He took on human flesh so that He might die, and by dying so that He might conquer, so that He might nullify the power of the enemy, so that He might destroy and nullify and take away the fear of death, your fear of what awaits you, your fear of uncertainty, your fear of relationships gone crazy, your fear of the chaos and the brokenness. The Christmas story resonates and speaks to us and says, amidst all of that, it is better than you even realize. For unto us is born a Savior, who is Christ the Lord.